Before there was a name, there was a presence. Before the cradle, before the carpenter's son, before the prophet walking barefoot through Galilee, there was something far older, something without time, without boundary, something that moved not through history, but through eternity. You may have heard of him. You may have prayed to him, feared him, followed him, or walked away. But this story is not about the Jesus you were taught. This is not the Sunday school Messiah, nor the convenient figure sculpted by doctrine and dogma. This is the Jesus the soul remembers. He was never meant to be confined to altars and stained glass. He came not to build a religion, but to awaken a kingdom not of this world, yet present in every beating heart that dares to remember who they are. Long before he walked the hills of Palestine, he was known in the stars. In the celestial records of the universe, he bears another name, Michael of Nebadon, a sovereign son, a creator of worlds, one among the vast family of divine beings who birth the galaxies with light. He chose this world, this broken, confused, magnificent world, as the stage for his supreme revelation. He came not only to save us, but to understand us, to become one of us, to walk in dust and drink from our sorrows. And so, this is not a biography. It is a remembrance, a sacred unveiling, a map for those whose hearts have always known there was more to the story, more than the silence of the tomb, more than the rituals of men, more than the fear of a distant God. If your soul is thirsty, come closer. If your heart has questions that sermons could never answer, come closer. If you have ever suspected that the Jesus of history was only the beginning, then this journey is yours too. He is not far. He is not gone. He is the flame we forgot to feed, the path we almost remembered. And now he calls. There are truths too vast for language, too sacred for the noise of doctrine. Truths that whisper, not shout, appearing in the pauses between thoughts, in the ache beneath the surface of our lives. We were never meant to inherit secondhand stories about him. We were meant to walk with him, to feel his eyes reading us like living scripture, to hear his voice not from pulpits, but from the marrow of our bones. For centuries, humanity has tried to fit the infinite into temples made by hands. They've crowned him, crucified him, commodified him. They made him into a god too distant to touch, or man too small to transform a world. But beneath all that, beneath the centuries of translation and interpretation, there remains a presence, intact, burning, unchanged. He did not come to be understood. He came to be known, and there is a difference. To understand is to dissect, to measure, to name. To know is to surrender, to remember, to merge. Those who walked with him long ago did not follow him because of what he taught. They followed because something in them awoke. When he looked at them, they remembered their origin. They saw the truth of themselves mirrored back in the eyes of man who walked like the wind, knew his name. This is why the story must be told again, not as history, but as a living presence, not as a tale bound by time, but as a path that continues to unfold within every soul who dares to walk it. The Jesus revealed in the sacred text of Urantia is not a stranger to those who listen deeply. He is not another version of the old narrative. He is the flame behind it, the soul beneath the scripture, the breath that turned dust into atom and silence into song. He is still here, waiting, but not in the skies, nor in the books, nor even in the relics of ancient faiths. He waits in a quiet place inside you, the temple not built with hands. The kingdom he spoke of was not a kingdom of conquest, but of remembrance, not a throne of gold, but of stillness. And that kingdom is near, nearer than breath, older than time, more intimate than your own name. To follow him is not to believe, but to become. And yet, to become what he revealed is to surrender every illusion we've ever called identity. It is to leave behind the scaffolding of belief and step barefoot into mystery. It is to trust that within the silence of your being, something ancient is awakening, something that has always known him. Not the man on the cross, but the presence behind the veil. Not the theology, but the trembling truth that you are not separate and never were. The Urantia Book does not give us a myth to believe. It gives us a mirror, a portal. It tells of a son who chose this world not out of obligation, but out of devotion. A creator who became creature, not to prove his divinity, but to embody our own sacred potential. He came to taste suffering, to walk the corridors of loneliness, to dwell inside the messiness of human life, and to show us, through his every breath, what it means to be divine while deeply human. This is the story the soul remembers, even when the mind forgets. It is the gentle ache that wakes you in the middle of the night, the longing that no possession or pleasure can satisfy. It is the silent whisper you've heard 1,000 times but never dared to follow. It is the mystery of Christ, not as icon, not as doctrine, but as the essence of who you are when all else falls away. You were never meant to observe him from afar. You were meant to walk with him, to recognize yourself in his reflection. The real story of Jesus is not what happened 2,000 years ago. It is what happens now. Every time you choose love over fear, every time you forgive instead of defend, every time you remember that the kingdom is not coming, it is here. So let this be the beginning, not of another biography, but of a journey, a remembering, a return, not to religion, not to history, but to the fire that called the stars by name and now calls you. Chapter 1. The Eternal Before Time. The origin of Michael of Nebadon. Long before he was called Jesus, he was, not as a memory, not as an idea, but as a sovereign presence whose breath seeded galaxies and whose light gave rhythm to time itself. He did not begin in Bethlehem. He did not awaken in the waters of the Jordan. He did not emerge from Mary's womb as a first act, but as a descent, a voluntary stepping down from dimensions so vast that cannot be named in human thought. To understand Jesus without knowing who he was before time is to see only the shadow of a star. The fullness of his life does not begin in history. It begins in eternity. In the book of Urantia, he is known as Michael of Nebadon, a creator son of the Paradise Trinity, one of many who are born not of flesh, but of divinity. These are not metaphors. These are not embellishments. They are revelations given to a world still learning how to see the sacred beyond its scriptures. The Creator Sons are not distant cosmic figures. They are divine architects of the very universes we inhabit. And Michael, the one we call Jesus, is the sovereign architect of this universe of Nebadon, of which our planet Urantia is but a single spark. And yet he came here, not because he had to, but because love, in its highest form, descends. A creator longing not only to rule, but to walk, to weep, to know. He chose not a palace among the stars, but a fragile world darkened by rebellion, confusion, and spiritual isolation. He entered this broken circle not to condemn it, but to illuminate it from within. His incarnation was not a divine experiment, but a supreme bestowal, an offering of the infinite clothed in the limits of man. Before he spoke in parables, he was the Word, the Logos, as John called him. Not a sound, but the very ordering principle of all existence. A creative intelligence that speaks stars into being and gives coherence to reality. The Greeks knew him as Nous, the divine mind that permeates all things, holding the visible and invisible in a single harmony. The Hebrews sensed him in Chakma, wisdom, crying out from the gates, dwelling before the foundation of the world, delighting in the sons of men. These were not separate truths, but facets of the same jewel. Different cultures catching different rays of the same eternal light. And in the fullness of time, that light put on skin and walked among us. Not because he lost anything by descending, but because we had lost something that only he could help us recover, the memory of our divine origin. To speak of Michael is to speak of the silence before creation, of that sacred pause before the first light sang into the void, of the choice to manifest love not merely in theory, but in dust and tears. The Logos became a heartbeat. The Nous took on lungs. Wisdom entered the womb of a girl who said yes. And in that yes, the cosmos tilted. We often imagine creation as a moment, an instant in which all things suddenly were. But the truth is more delicate, more timeless. In the heart of the first source and center, before any moment could be measured, there was a yearning, not of lack, but of overflow. From that fullness emerged the sons of paradise, luminous beings whose very nature was to give form to the formless, to bend love into matter, to sculpt space with meaning. Each of these creator sons was unique, yet all bore the essence of their divine origin. Michael of Nebadon was one among them, but his path would become something unprecedented. He did not create by command alone. He infused creation with himself, with the living fragrance of intention, of order, of compassion. In the vast laboratories of eternity, he shaped not only planets and stars, but the potential for soulhood, for beauty, for becoming. He planted within each world a seed of the divine drama, the unfolding of beings who might one day choose to remember who they are. And yet, something in him longed to experience the creation not only from above, but from within. Not to control it from afar, but to walk beside it, to feel it from the inside out. It is a mystery that defies theology, that the Creator would choose to become the created, not as illusion, but as incarnation. Not for spectacle, but for empathy. Not to prove power, but to embody presence. To contemplate the pre-existence of Christ is not to lose him in abstraction, but to find ourselves mirrored in the cosmic longing that gave rise to form. For just as he descended from the heights in a flesh, so too does the soul descend, clothed in forgetfulness, longing to remember. His story is our story, written on a scale too vast for a single lifetime to contain. He came not to demonstrate how divine he was, but how divine we are capable of becoming. In the sacred texts of wisdom, we hear his echoes before his name. When John spoke of the Word who was with God and was God, he was not reciting theology, he was remembering that at the root of all becoming is a voice that speaks all things into coherence. When Solomon wrote of wisdom rejoicing before the dawn of time, he was touching the edge of that same mystery. When Plotinus described the nous as the emanation of the One, the bridge between unity and multiplicity, he too was catching a glimpse of that eternal Christ, the one whose very being gives meaning to all form. These are not fictions. They are the soul's archaeology. Each myth, each symbol, each sacred phrase, like scattered pieces of a single revelation trying to make itself known again through us. What Urantia gives us is not a replacement for these truths, but a fuller map, a lens through which to see the invisible made visible. And perhaps this is the most sacred truth of all, that the one we knew as Jesus is not an isolated figure in history, but a radiant thread running through the whole fabric of being. He is not the exception to what we are. He is the revelation of what we have forgotten we could be. It is not by accident that the myths of gods descending to earth echo across cultures. From the avatars of Hinduism to the divine kings of Egypt, from the incarnate wisdom of Sophia to the messianic dreams of Israel, humanity has always sensed that the divine longs to dwell among us, not as ruler, but as companion. These stories, scattered and often distorted by time, still carry a residue of truth. They are the half-remembered dreams of the soul, the whisperings of our forgotten origin. But unlike myth, what occurred through Michael of Nebadon was not legend. It was history dressed in eternity. The Creator came not to impose, but to invite, not to hover above us, but to kneel beside us. In a Urantia revelation, this is not a poetic embellishment, but the core of spiritual cosmology. The infinite becomes intimate. The one beyond time chooses incarnation in time, not to dazzle us with miracles, but to show us the dignity of the ordinary, the sacredness of the human path. The mystery is not that Christ came to earth. The mystery is that he came as one of us, not to bypass the human condition, but to fulfill it. He who had shaped constellations came to learn how to walk. He who had called forth angelic hosts allowed himself to be taught language by his mother's voice. He who reigned over systems of light entered a world that barely remembered its own source and loved it anyway. To know this Jesus, the one who was Michael before he was Messiah, is to begin remembering ourselves not as scattered dust, but as participants in a divine unfolding. His story did not begin in Nazareth, nor will it end in the pages of Scripture. It is a living vibration moving through creation, a breath that continues to shape the invisible structure of our becoming. He is not merely an object of worship, but a mirror of origin. Not a deity perched on clouds, but the word that still pulses beneath matter, calling it toward meaning. To awaken to this Christ is to recognize the sacred embedded in all form, the presence that precedes thought, the light that does not flicker in the face of darkness. He is not only the carpenter, he is the pattern from which all wood was shaped. He is not only the teacher, he is the resonance in every truth spoken from the heart. He is not only the risen one, he is the memory of ascent that dwells within every soul. And so, to speak of his origin is not to look backward. It is to look deeper. It is to let go of the linear story and enter the spiral of remembrance. He has always been here, beneath the veil of matter, behind the rhythm of breath, beneath the silence before the word. And even now, he waits, not above, but within, ready to unfold once more, not just in vision, but in you. Chapter 2, The Descent of the Son of Man. He did not choose this world because it was glorious. He chose it because it was wounded. And in the logic of divine love, wounds are not weaknesses, they are invitations. Urantia, this small and confused orb trembling on the edges of Nebadon, had become a planet marked by rebellion, disconnection, and spiritual quarantine. Its records were fractured, its memory dim, its light shrouded by a fog that no human hand could disperse. And yet, it was here, precisely here, that the fullness of divine revelation would choose to unfold. The Son of Man did not descend as a rescuer into chaos, but as a presence into forgetfulness. He did not arrive to impose order, but to restore remembrance. According to the sacred revelations of Urantia, this world had long been affected by the rebellion of Lucifer and the betrayal of Caligastia, the planetary prince who once held authority here but severed himself from the circuits of divine light. The consequences were not merely mythic. They were real, cosmic, systemic. This world was isolated from the spiritual highways of the universe. It had become a classroom closed off from the curriculum, a child left alone in the dark, a note lost in the music of creation. And still he came. In the vastness of Nebadon, there were countless worlds he could have chosen for his seventh and final bestowal. Worlds luminous with spiritual awareness, societies evolved in peace and harmony, civilizations receptive to divine guidance. But he chose Urantia, a broken world with trembling hands, a confused species reaching out to a sky it barely understood. And in that choice lies the profound logic of grace, that the lowest places are where the highest truths wish to be born, that the lost are not last in the eyes of God, but first. He came not to elevate himself, but to lift us, not with the force of power, but with the presence of love. And he did not descend like a warrior from the heavens, but like a seed falling into soil, quietly, gently, unnoticed by empires and unseen by kings. In the long memory of humanity, stories have echoed across continents and ages of gods descending in human form. These were not mere fantasies of primitive minds, but symbolic fingerprints of a universal intuition that the divine has always longed to walk among us. In the sacred tales of Krishna, the infinite manifests in a child who brings harmony to a world in chaos. In the myth of Osiris, the divine is broken and scattered only to be resurrected through love and remembrance. In the journey of Siddhartha, the prince renounces worldly illusions to awaken as the Buddha under a tree of silent knowing. In the wind-carried myth of Quetzalcoatl, a feathered serpent walks the earth to teach peace and balance, only to promise a return. Each of these figures, wrapped in different garments of culture, time, and language, reveals the same archetypal hunger. The yearning for heaven to kiss earth, for spirit to touch matter, for God to become known not in abstraction, but in skin. Yet none of these descents unfolded as did the coming of Michael of Nebadon. For this was not the tale of a divine being sent by higher powers. It was the Creator himself choosing limitation, choosing humility, choosing the total immersion into the human condition. And in that descent, he would not only embody divinity, he would redeem the meaning of humanity itself. The manner of his birth was no coincidence. The virgin womb is more than biological detail. It is a symbol layered in meaning, a vessel through which the cosmos tells a story the mind cannot fully grasp. It is the archetype of receptivity, the untouched place within each soul where the divine may enter unfiltered, undistorted, unclaimed by ego or lineage. It is not purity in the moral sense, but openness in the mystical sense, the unguarded gate where God may speak. Mary's yes was not the end of a prophecy. It was the beginning of creation retold. In that moment, the universal became intimate. The uncontainable was held in arms. The silence before the word became the cry of an infant under stars too ancient to name. And with that cry, the veil began to thin. He came as all humans come, fragile, dependent, unknowing, yet within him pulsed the memory of galaxies. He was not pretending to be human. He was human, entirely, yet he did not forget who he was. And in this paradox, of fullness and limitation, of divinity and hunger, of infinity and time, he began to unfold among us the greatest revelation this world has ever known. That God is not only above, but within, that the journey of heaven to earth is also the journey of earth back to heaven. Chapter 3, The Child Between Two Worlds. He entered the world not with thunder, but with breath, not with proclamations, but with crying. His first miracle was not water into wine. It was simply this, that the infinite allowed itself to be held. In a land of stone and dust, under the stars of forgotten empire, the creator of Nebadon took his first steps into humanity as a child, fragile, wide-eyed, learning how to speak, how to walk, how to be. The Bible speaks little of this beginning. A silent span stretches from Bethlehem to the temple in Jerusalem, a single glimpse at age 12, and then silence again. The Gospels, in their haste to deliver the Redeemer, bypass the becoming of the boy. But the Urantia Book does not. In its unfolding vision, we are offered something richer, a tapestry of early life woven with care, humility, and unrecorded divinity. He was not a prodigy in the eyes of the world. He did not part rivers or command beasts. He was a child, but within him stirred a clarity far beyond his years, a stillness that sensed the deeper rhythm behind all things. He played, worked, and wept like others. Yet often he would stop, stare at the horizon, and ask questions that no adult could answer. He could see beyond surfaces, not because he was trying, but because he was remembering. From an early age, he wrestled with something few could understand, the quiet tension of knowing more than he could express, of being more than he could reveal. The divine spark within him glowed gently, never demanding recognition. He did not boast of his origin. He studied scrolls with reverence. He listened to elders with humility. He served his family, comforted his siblings, honored his mother, and mourned his father with tears that soaked the soil of Nazareth. In those years, the soul of Jesus was not just preparing, it was anchoring. He was learning how to hold eternity within the limits of time. He was learning the language of limitation without forgetting the dialect of light. And more than anything, he was learning to wait. The divine child is not a fantasy of myth. It is an archetype etched into the spiritual DNA of creation, a symbol of pure potential, unformed and unforgotten, still close to the source. We see it in Horus upon the lap of Isis, in Krishna's mischievous eyes, in the Buddha's calm before enlightenment. Each bears the fragrance of heaven, not yet diluted by the world. But Jesus was not merely echoing the archetype. He was the fulfillment of it. He did not point toward the divine child. He was the living pulse of that reality, clothed in dust, hidden in ordinariness. The absence of detail in the canonical texts is not a void, but a doorway. The silence surrounding his early years is not accidental. It is sacred space. It invites those who listen deeply to enter with reverence, not to speculate, but to remember. Between the lines of the Gospels, the child Jesus is hidden not by omission, but by mystery. And mystery is never meant to be solved. It is meant to be entered. The apocryphal writings, though colored by legend and imagination, attempt to bridge the gap. In them we find Jesus shaping birds from clay, speaking to animals, astounding teachers, radiating awareness. While these accounts may not hold the historical weight of the Urantia records, they reveal something deeper. Humanity's unrelenting intuition that this child was not like others, that he carried the sky in his silence, that he walked with one foot in the world and the other in the unseen. But the greatest miracle of his childhood was not in supernatural acts. It was in his restraint. It was in his refusal to claim what was not yet meant to be revealed. He knew, but he waited. He saw, but he listened. He remembered, but he lived as one who had forgotten, so that we might one day remember through him. This is the essence of incarnation, not the display of divine privilege, but the descent into human forgetting. The veil that cloaks every soul also touched him. The difference was that he chose it. He entered the limitations of time and space not to escape them, but to transform them from within. He subjected himself to the gradual unfolding of consciousness, the ache of growth, the uncertainty of becoming. Not to pretend, but to participate. For it is one thing to shine from the heavens. It is another to walk among those who have forgotten their own light. In his early years, he learned the texture of labor, the scent of sawdust, the sound of laughter echoing through narrow streets. He learned how to be kind when misunderstood, how to hold peace in the midst of conflict, how to love without being fully known. These were not just lessons for the man he would become. They were revelations for the world he came to heal. Each experience became a stone in the foundation of his soul's expression. Each moment of waiting carved deeper space for divine presence. He was not only growing as a boy, he was tuning the instrument of his humanity to receive the full song of the Spirit. The child between two worlds carried within him a silent flame, not to display, not to control, but to protect. For that flame would one day ignite not just his path, but ours. And though he was still hidden in the quiet years of youth, the heavens watched with bated breath. For the time would come when the veil would lift and the forgotten word would rise again from the lips of a man who had first learned how to be a child. Chapter 4. The Awakening Adolescent. There's a particular kind of silence that only adolescence knows. The silence between what we were and what we are becoming. For Jesus, that silence was not empty, but alive. It carried within it the weight of a world that did not yet see him, and the quiet certainty of a purpose that had not yet spoken. In those formative years, something within him stirred, not as thunder or prophecy, but as an ache too large for language. It was not confusion. It was the beginning of memory returning. He was no longer a child. The games of innocence faded like morning mist. His questions grew sharper, his gaze deeper. He began to feel the edges of something vast moving beneath the surface of his life, a current invisible to those around him, but persistent like the heartbeat of another world pulsing beneath his own skin. There was no voice from the sky, no glowing scrolls, only the slow unfolding of awareness, the sacred weight of choice beginning to press upon his young soul. He knew who he was becoming, but he did not yet know what that becoming would demand. When Joseph died, the boy became a man before the world was ready. The carpenter's tools passed from hand to hand, and in the silence of grief, Jesus stepped into the role of provider, protector, and pillar. There was no ceremony, no proclamation, only responsibility and the holy ache of absence. His tears were not only for the man who had raised him, but for the curtain that seemed to fall once again between him and the Father. For though he trusted the presence beyond all presence, there were moments when that presence felt impossibly far. This was his first true initiation, not through miracles or visions, but through loss. Through the humble labor of tending to family, through the unseen hours of work and weariness, through the choice to stay when he longed to go. It was in this hidden obedience that his divinity was tested, not in displays of power, but in surrender to the ordinary. While others his age searched for identity in rebellion or escape, he walked into the fire of quiet duty and allowed it to purify him. And still, he waited. The silence of the Father was not abandonment. It was preparation. Not absence, but space. Space for something deeper to take root. In those years when the heavens seemed quiet, Jesus was not forgotten. He was being entrusted. He was learning how to listen not with the ear, but with the soul. He was being shaped by the long patience of love, the kind that does not rush revelation, but waits until the heart is ready to carry it with grace. This was his silent initiation, not into titles or positions, but into presence. into the raw courage of remaining fully human while carrying the whisper of the divine. Like Siddhartha beneath the fig tree, Jesus began to feel the tremble of awakening move through him, not in thunder, but in clarity. He did not seek enlightenment in temples or visions. He found it in wood, in waiting, in walking back home when he longed to journey outward. Like the prophets of old, Samuel, Jeremiah, Daniel, he heard the unspoken call long before it echoed through events. He knew the voice before it spoke his name aloud. He could have run. He could have used the growing awareness within him to elevate himself, to gather disciples, to speak out with early certainty. But he chose to remain hidden. He chose to be shaped by the slow rhythm of time. He chose to deepen his roots before revealing his light. There were days when he stood on the hills above Nazareth and watched the sky as if waiting for a sign that never came. But he did not grow bitter. He did not turn away. He carried the unanswered questions like seeds, knowing that in time they would bloom. His power was not in what he could do. It was in what he chose not to do. He was not becoming divine. He was learning how to carry divinity in a human frame. The temptation to bypass pain, to ascend without struggle, to reveal before the right time. These were real, and he refused them, quietly, daily, with no audience but the stars and the Father whose voice lived now only in stillness. It is easy to speak of destiny when it arrives with clarity. It is holy to hold it when it hides. In the unrecorded years of his adolescence, Jesus was not preparing for the spotlight. He was becoming the lamp. He was not rehearsing his mission. He was becoming the message. By the time the call would come, he would be ready, not because he had mastered the world, but because he had mastered himself. And when the voice would speak again, not as silence, but as thunder, he would not hesitate, because he had waited long enough to know it by heart. Chapter 5. The Cosmic Decision at the Jordan. The water was cold, but the moment burned. It was not just the Jordan that flowed that day. It was time itself, converging in a single act of surrender. Jesus stepped into the river not to be cleansed, but to reveal what was already pure. His baptism was not repentance, it was alignment. A moment when the hidden years gave birth to a visible calling. A decision not to begin a ministry, but to consecrate a universe. John saw a man. The heavens saw a sun. There was no spectacle. The crowds were common. The prophet was rugged, half-wild from years in the wilderness. But something ancient stirred in the air as Jesus approached. The waters had received many bodies, but never this one. For in him, Creator and creation met in flesh, and the river itself remembered the sound of its source. As he descended into the water, he carried the whole of Urantia with him, not as burden, but as offering. He submerged not only his body, but the fullness of his choice. He was not being claimed by divinity. He was claiming it from within, declaring before angels and men, "I am ready." And then the silence split, not with lightning or fire, but with a voice that needed no interpretation. A voice that had spoken stars into existence, now spoke into time. "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." It was not an announcement. It was a reunion. Heaven and earth, Father and Son, the infinite and the finite, now one. Not by force, but by will. Not by command, but by consent. This was not simply the confirmation of identity. It was the unification of wills. The divine will and the human will no longer in dialogue, but in communion. This was the moment of complete self-awareness. Not the awakening of divinity within humanity, but the full remembering of divinity through humanity. He did not discover who he was in that instant. He affirmed it. The years of hidden knowing, the silent disciplines, the unanswered questions, all converged here in the river, under the sky, before a trembling world. But the voice from above was not the end of the moment. It was the doorway to another beginning. The baptism was not a culmination, but a threshold. And as soon as the heavens opened, the Spirit did not lead him to the crowds or the cities or the seats of power. It led him into the wilderness. It is a strange logic, this rhythm of heaven, that the one declared beloved must now face the silence again, not as child, but as sovereign soul, not to earn his place, but to refine his presence. The desert is not a punishment. It is a proving ground, not for God's sake, but for ours. 40 days beneath an open sky, with no roof but stars, no comfort but stones, no bread but breath. Here, in the vast barrenness, every illusion came to greet him, not with horns and fire, but with suggestion. The temptation was never grotesque. It was subtle, familiar, reasonable. To turn stones to bread, to call angels to his rescue, to rule the kingdoms of the world. It was not sin that tempted him. It was the misuse of truth, the whisper that said, "Use what you are for your own sake. Let the world see what power looks like. Be divine without the cost of surrender." But he did not come to conquer. He came to reveal. And revelation does not need spectacle. It needs stillness. It needs choice. And so he chose. He chose hunger over manipulation. He chose trust over proof. He chose obscurity over dominion. He chose to remain within the limitations of his mission, not because he could not escape them, but because he would not abandon us in them. The desert was not a detour. It was the crucible of clarity. The same Spirit that declared him beloved now stood silently beside him as he refused every false version of his identity. He emerged not only intact, but radiant, not with the glow of victory, but with the weight of purpose, the quiet authority of one who has looked into the eyes of illusion and did not blink. This was the decision at the Jordan, not only to say yes to the Father, but to become the yes, to embody it without resistance, without remainder, to walk not above the world, but within it, with full awareness of who he was and full commitment to what he came to be. And from that moment on, he would no longer carry the light in secret. He would become the light by which the world would begin to see. Chapter 6, The Desert and the 40 Days. The desert was empty, but not silent. Its silence had a voice, the voice that speaks only when all others are gone. Here, beneath the sun and under the stars, stripped of shelter, comfort, and distraction, Jesus faced not Satan in the form of myth, but the primal voices that whisper through the mind of every soul. Prove yourself. Protect yourself. Possess the world. These are not temptations for the weak. They were invitations to distort the truth, to seize what he had already been given by other means, by shortcuts not worthy of the mission he bore. He had just heard the words, "You are my beloved Son." But even the soul who hears the voice of heaven must walk through the doubt that echoes after it. And so the test came not to create his identity, but to test its clarity. For what is truth if it cannot stand naked in the face of illusion? The desert is a mirror. It reflects nothing that does not already live within. There are no crowds, no affirmations, no affirming glances. Only the raw confrontation with one's own thoughts, one's own hunger, one's own longing to escape the tension of becoming. It was not Satan with horns who met him. It was the whisper of power misused. Turn these stones into bread. You're hungry. You're God. Why suffer? Why wait? Use what you are. Satisfy the need. It was not evil that tempted him. It was urgency. The voice of now over the rhythm of eternity. But he answered not with defiance, but with stillness, Man shall not live by bread alone. For he knew that hunger is not always meant to be filled, but to be felt, to carve space for something higher. Then came the pinnacle, the holy place, the very structure of spiritual authority. Throw yourself down, prove your holiness, force heaven's hand. It was the temptation of spectacle, to be seen, to be admired, to be declared. But he knew that true divinity has no need to perform, that faith is not proved by miracles, but by the refusal to demand them. You shall not test the Lord your God, not because he feared the fall, but because he had already ascended beyond the need to rise in human eyes. And at last the kingdoms, the shimmering promise of dominion without the cross. All this can be yours. Just bow, just bend, just one compromise, and the world will be yours. But the world was already his, not through allegiance to shadow, but through the light he came to reveal. Worship the Lord your God and serve him only. In that final refusal, the desert itself seemed to exhale. The winds grew quiet. The earth held its breath. And the adversary, real or symbolic, visible or internal, departed. But Jesus did not emerge triumphant. He emerged emptied, not filled with pride, but with peace. Not armored in glory, but clothed in clarity. The desert did not make him strong. It made him simple, clear, ready. The wilderness did not take something from him. It gave something back, not in the form of power, but of permission to live without needing anything the world calls valuable. The temptations were not trials of morality. They were questions of identity. Will you be who you are without needing to prove it? Will you carry divinity without using it to escape the ache of humanity? There is a death that happens in the desert, not of the body, but of the false self, the one that clings to control, to certainty, to recognition. Jesus did not conquer evil in those 40 days. He saw through it. He allowed it to speak, and then he answered with silence, with scripture, with surrender. Not once did he resist in the way the world understands resistance. He simply did not agree. He did not bend inward. He did not collapse in his self. And this is the mystery the world has never fully understood, that the first act of his public ministry was not a sermon or a healing or a miracle. It was emptiness. 40 days of hunger, solitude, and inner stripping. Before he lifted the burdens of others, he laid down every burden of his own that was not rooted in love. Before he taught, he listened. Before he walked among the crowds, he walked into himself. What began at the Jordan was not a coronation, but a descent, from affirmation to emptiness, from the voice of God to the silence of the desert. And yet it was that descent that made the rising true. For only the one who has gone to the depths without losing the light can carry that light to others. His ministry did not begin with clarity alone. It began with integrity. He emerged from the desert not as a man seeking approval, but as one free from the need of it. Not as one hungry for attention, but as one whose hunger had already been transformed. The power he now carried was not for display. It was for the restoration of others. The voice he would soon use to calm storms and call forth life was now anchored in the stillness forged in solitude. And so, when he stepped out of the wilderness, the winds behind him and the dust at his feet, he carried no wealth, no title, no followers. Only fire, only presence, only a heart so clear it could hold the weight of a broken world without breaking. He did not need the world's kingdoms. He had remembered his own. Chapter 7, the master among men. When he emerged from the wilderness, he did not come with trumpets or scrolls or proclamations. He came with eyes that had seen the truth and were now ready to see others. He came not with a throne, but with sandals worn by silence. He carried nothing. and yet everything he touched became full. People followed him not because of what he promised, but because of what they felt in his presence, a quiet clarity, a recognition, a returning. He walked through villages and fields like a man who belonged nowhere and yet belonged everywhere. He did not seek the powerful. He sought the listening. He did not gather soldiers. He gathered the wounded, the weary, the watchers of the sky, the ones who knew there was more, though they couldn't yet name it. And then, one by one, he began to call them. Not the learned, not the polished, not the proud. Fishermen with tired hands. Tax collectors with guarded eyes. Skeptics, dreamers, rebels, doubters. Each one a fragment of the human soul. Each one a question disguised as a man. He did not demand perfection. He invited presence. And in that presence, they began to awaken. The 12 were not chosen for their strength, but for their willingness to follow without knowing the end. They were mirrors, not only of humanity's longing, but of its contradiction. Within them lived ambition and fear, loyalty and betrayal, simplicity and pride. And he loved them, not in spite of this, but through it. For in loving them as they were, he was already shaping who they would become. His ministry was not a campaign. It was a current. Word spread not because he advertised, but because hearts remembered when he spoke. Crowds gathered, some with desperation, some with curiosity, some with hunger that even bread could not fill. And still, he did not turn them away. He moved among them like water moves through roots, slowly, deeply, invisibly transforming. He healed, yes, but his miracles were not performances. They were signs, reminders that the world we see is not the whole of what is. Each act was a teaching, veiled in mercy. The blind saw, not only because their eyes were opened, but because the veil between seen and unseen was briefly lifted. The leper was cleansed, not only of disease, but of shame. The lame walked, and in walking, remembered their own forgotten worth. And still he taught, but not with rules, with stories. He spoke in stories not to conceal truth, but to protect it. He knew that the deepest wisdom cannot be taught by force. It must rise from within. A parable is not an answer. It is a seed. It must be carried, pondered, sometimes forgotten, only to awaken later in the quiet soil of experience. Jesus did not lecture. He evoked. He did not explain, he invited. A sower, a vineyard, a pearl, a lamp beneath a basket, a merchant, a widow, a son lost and returning. These were not inventions. They were windows, mirrors, doorways into a reality that could not be reached through doctrine. He never told people what the kingdom was in abstract terms. He gave them glimpses, glimpses wrapped in the common language of life, glimpses meant to pass through intellect and rest in the hidden chamber of the soul. Some did not understand. Many did not want to. To enter the kingdom meant more than belief. It meant reversal, reorientation, the last first, the poor blessed, the meek inheriting what the powerful could never own. It meant letting go of the self we have built to protect ourselves in order to receive the self that was waiting beneath all along. He knew he would not be understood, and still he spoke. He knew many would follow the miracles and flee from the message. And still he healed. He knew his path would lead not to a throne, but to a cross. And still he called the 12, knowing one would betray, another would deny, and all would scatter. But he did not build his work upon their faithfulness. He built it upon their capacity to be transformed. He walked among them not as a king, but as a brother, not as a distant master, but as one who knew the taste of dust, the ache of hunger, the fatigue of a body worn by days poured out in love. And still he gave, day after day, word after word, step after step. He gave not only from divinity, but from humanity, showing that the greatest miracle is not the power to change the world, but the willingness to be fully present within it. He was the master because he never demanded to be, because his authority came not from power, but from presence. Because when he looked at you, you saw not only him, you saw yourself, remembered. And that was his true teaching, that the kingdom is not far. It is as near as a seed, as near as breath, as near as the story you almost understand and are already living. Chapter 8, The Spirituality of the Everyday. He did not come to overthrow empires with fire. He came to rewire the soul with love. His revolution did not begin in palaces, but in doorways, in share bread, in a hand on the shoulder of the forgotten. It was not loud. It was not declared, but it was unrelenting. He did not seek to fix the world by force. He changed it by seeing it differently and inviting others to see through his eyes. To walk with Jesus was to slowly unlearn the scales of value the world had taught. Power did not impress him. Titles did not silence him. What moved him was hunger, not only of the body, but of the heart. He saw not what people owned, but what they carried unseen. He looked past what was broken and into what could be mended. And in that gaze, something changed, not only in the one seen, but in the one watching. His presence turned tables into temples, not because of ritual, but because of recognition. The act of sitting with others, of sharing food and laughter and silence, became an act of spiritual union. He called no one unworthy of his company. Tax collectors, prostitutes, lepers, widows, none were beneath him, and so all were lifted. He saw the sacred not as distant, but as incarnate in the everyday, not hidden in mystery, but waiting in the common. The bread he broke was more than nourishment, it was declaration. That life itself, when shared in love, becomes holy. That nothing is too ordinary to carry divine meaning. That the table is not the prelude to the altar, it is the altar. He restored dignity not through commands, but through proximity. He spoke with women in public when others looked away. He touched the sick without hesitation. He knelt before children and took their hands as equals. Every gesture was a sermon without words. You are worthy. You are seen. You are not less. He did not grant them value. He revealed the value they already possessed. It was not theological debate that changed hearts. It was the way he lingered with the wounded, the way he listened longer than necessary, the way he walked at the pace of those left behind. The revolution he led could not be cataloged in policies or doctrines. It lived in the invisible, in the silence between words, in the warmth of shared presence, in the way he paused when others rushed. He did not teach people to escape the world. He taught them to love it differently, to sanctify the ordinary, to begin building a new world not by changing systems, but by softening hearts. He did not announce a system. He embodied a way so disarming in its simplicity that it escaped the notice of the powerful. While others waited for thrones and angels, he knelt to wash feet. While the world measured worth by lineage and law, he measured by the openness of the heart. And in this quiet reversal, he planted the seeds of a new kind of kingdom, not built with walls, but with presence, not ruled from above, but growing from within. He was not content to speak of love. He became its movement, its rhythm, its voice in the face of fear. For him, love was not a feeling. It was the ethic of existence. It was the law behind all laws. To love was not a sentiment. It was a choice, a stance, a posture toward every face encountered, every story heard, every wound witnessed. And from that posture came power, not the power to rule, but the power to restore. The people he touched did not leave with more knowledge. They left with more light, with more stillness, with more permission to be what they were afraid they had lost. They were not given steps to follow. They were seen, and in that seeing, they found their own steps again. He did not draw maps. He opened hearts. His teachings were not formulas. They were invitations to forgive more than seemed fair, to bless those who cursed, to lend without expecting return, to carry burdens not as duty, but as compassion. These were not abstract ideals. They were daily practices, interior revolutions that, when lived, would undo the very structures of fear, judgment, and separation that ruled the world. In him, justice was not retribution, it was restoration. Mercy was not weakness, it was wisdom. Holiness was not separation from the world, it was immersion into it with open eyes and a soft heart. This was his new civilization, not one that waited for heaven to descend, but one that realized heaven begins wherever love becomes flesh, wherever the outcast is welcomed, wherever the hungry are fed without question, wherever the stranger becomes friend, and the forgotten are remembered by name. He was not building a religion. He was calling forth a remembrance that we were never meant to live by fear, that we were never asked to earn love, that every soul, no matter how buried or broken, still carries the image of the one who called all things good. In every shared meal, in every healed wound, in every story told beside the road, he revealed the true sanctuary, not made of stone, but of love made visible. And that sanctuary is still being built, one open heart at a time. Chapter 9, The Love That Confronts the World. There's a kind of love that soothes, and there's a kind of love that burns. Jesus carried both. The tenderness that healed the leper's skin was the same flame that scorched the facades of hollow righteousness. His presence comforted the broken, but it disturbed the powerful. Because he did not bow, he did not conform, he did not speak in the language of political strategy or religious hierarchy. He carried no titles sanctioned by men, yet his authority silenced rooms. He wrote nothing on scrolls, yet his words split stone hearts wide open. He entered the temple not with offerings, but with eyes that saw through the gold and incense and into the machinery of spiritual control. The temple was meant to be a house of prayer, a gateway for the soul, but it had become a fortress for the elite, a business cloaked in holiness. So he overturned the tables, not in rage, but in revelation. His anger was not vengeance. It was truth too holy to remain silent, and the guardians of power felt it, felt the tremor in their bones when he spoke of a kingdom not made by human hands. A kingdom where the last are first, where mercy rules over law, where love reorders everything. His freedom was terrifying, not because it threatened to kill, but because it refused to be afraid. He was not trying to dismantle systems by force. He was making them irrelevant by living another way. He stood before priests, not as a rebel, but as one utterly unowned. They asked questions to trap him, but he answered with silence, with questions of his own, or with truths too free to be confined by their categories. His refusal to play the game was his greatest threat, because when you cannot be controlled by fear, flattery, or force, you reveal the prison others have accepted as home. His every step was a confrontation, not with violence, but with clarity. And clarity, when it meets corruption, always causes unrest. He offered no program. He drafted no manifestos. He simply lived free, so free that even those who longed for liberation found themselves unnerved by the cost of it. Freedom is beautiful until it demands your chains. And Jesus did not just free the individual. He exposed the illusions that bound entire societies. He revealed the scaffolding of ego behind the mask of tradition, the hunger for control beneath the name of God. And he did it all without raising a sword. The kingdom he preached was not a correction of the old. It was its undoing. It could not be mapped by laws or contained within rituals. It moved like the wind, recognized not by titles, but by fruit, justice, mercy, forgiveness, joy. And it could not be inherited through bloodlines or bought with wealth. It was for the pure in heart, the peacemakers, the mourners, the meek, the ones who had nothing left but hunger for something real. This was not a kingdom waiting to come. It was here, already breaking in, already pulsing in the lives of those willing to see with new eyes, walk a slower path, love past the boundaries. It was, and is, the great reversal, a divine contradiction. It blesses the lowly and unsettles the secure. It crowns the poor in spirit and strips the proud of their illusions. And it cannot be controlled because it begins within. That is what made him dangerous. Not his miracles, not his following, but his refusal to yield the light he carried. His presence made others choose between love and law, between presence and performance, between the comfort of systems and the risk of truth. And many, even those who admired him, backed away, because his love was not soft. It was searing, it exposed, it purified, and it required everything. To follow him was not to adopt a belief. It was to step into a fire that burns away falsehood. It was to learn how to lose everything that does not serve love and call that lost freedom. He walked unarmed into the teeth of an empire, into the closed doors of religion, into the quiet desperation of humanity. And he carried nothing but truth, nothing but mercy, nothing but light. And still, he was not spared, because in a world addicted to control, to be free is the most dangerous thing of all. To be light is to become a mirror, and not everyone is ready to see themselves. Chapter 10, The Woman and the Mystery of the Christ. He saw her, not as the world saw her, not through the veil of shame or the gossip of men. He saw her essence, and in that seeing, something ancient stirred, something older than wounds, deeper than doctrine. She was not used to being looked at without hunger or judgment. Yet his gaze did not reduce her. It restored her. This is the first miracle of the Christ, that his presence returned women to themselves. Mary Magdalene did not need permission to follow him. She was already called, not by religion, but by recognition. In him, she saw what no one had ever shown her, not only love, but mirror, a reflection of the divine not as ruler, but as companion, not as distance, but as closeness, not as law, but as life. She followed not because he forgave her, but because he awakened her. And the Magdalene became not his possession, but his witness. She stood where the others fled. She wept where others denied. She remained. Then there was the woman they dragged through the streets, her hair tangled with dust and humiliation. Caught, they said, a trap, but not for her. A test, but one that would reveal the heart of the man they sought to condemn. She was silent, trembling, awaiting her sentence not from him, but from a system built to break her. Yet he knelt, wrote in dust, let time breathe. And then, without drama, without wrath, he looked up and said, let the one without sin cast the first stone. They left one by one, undone not by guilt, but by the absence of condemnation. And then he turned to her, the only man who could have judged her, and said, neither do I. It was not absolution. It was liberation. He gave her back her life, not as a prize, but as a birthright. At the well, he asked for water, a simple request. Yet in that moment, the walls between Samaritan and Jew, man and woman, prophet and exile collapsed. She asked, how is it that you speak to me? And the answer was in his eyes. He did not explain. He offered, if you knew the gift of God. He told her of her life, not to expose, but to reveal, not to shame, but to awaken. And she became the first evangelist, running into the town with water still clinging to her jar and eternity burning in her chest. These were not isolated moments. They were windows into the mystery that Jesus carried, the restoration of the feminine as sacred, as equal, as vessel of the divine. He was not restoring status. He was restoring essence. In a world where women were named only in relation to men, wife of, mother of, sinner or servant, he named them with no possessive. He spoke directly. He listened. He received, not with condescension, but with reverence. He saw them not as anomalies, but as carriers of a presence the world had silenced for too long. The sacred feminine was not something he discovered. It was something he remembered, and something he reawakened in others. The way he touched the lives of women was not simply countercultural. It was cosmic. He was restoring a balance that had tilted since Eden. In his presence, the fractured halves of humanity, masculine and feminine, began to recognize each other again, not in opposition, but in union. He did not preach about this. He lived it. In every gesture, in every word, in every silence, he honored the mystery of the feminine not as something to be explained, but as something to be welcomed. The mystics would later call this mystery by many names. In the Hebrew tradition, it is the Shekinah, the indwelling presence of God, luminous, nurturing, wise. In the Tao, it is the water that yields without breaking, the valley that receives all things, the mother that births without possessing. In the Gospel of Mary, it is the voice that dares to speak truth in the absence of the others, the wisdom that emerges not in competition, but in communion. These are not poetic abstractions. They are the faces of a forgotten fullness. And Jesus, in restoring the dignity of women, was also restoring the wholeness of humanity. He was not threatened by their depth. He welcomed it. He did not silence their intuition. He honored it. He did not fear their strength. He trusted it. And in doing so, he redefined holiness, not as domination or distance, but as intimacy and integration. The love he offered did not reduce. It expanded. It did not correct. It called forth. The women who encountered him did not become less of themselves. They became more, not in opposition to the masculine, but in sacred resonance with it. His presence allowed the veiled to be unveiled, the shame to be seen, the silence to speak. This was not a footnote in his mission. It was a pulse at its center. For how could a kingdom be whole if half its soul remained hidden? And so he lifted the veil, not only from the eyes of those who looked down, but from the hearts of those who had forgotten their worth. And in lifting it, he did not merely change the lives of a few women. He shifted the axis of what it meant to be human. He did not explain this mystery. He embodied it. Chapter 11, the Son of Man and the Destiny of Humanity. He called himself the Son of Man, not as a denial of divinity, but as a revelation of what it means to be truly human. In that title was a secret, an open secret, whispered in every soul that has ever longed to be whole. He was not pointing to himself as the exception, but as the example, not above us, but among us, not simply showing what God is, but showing what humanity can become when it remembers its source. To look at Jesus was to glimpse the original design of a human being, not merely a moral figure or a spiritual leader, but the living template of awakened consciousness. He was the image of the invisible, God not thundering from the sky, but breathing in dust. His presence bridged the great divide, not only between heaven and earth, but between what we are and what we have forgotten we are capable of becoming. His was not the life of a distant deity performing divine acts. It was the life of a man so emptied of ego, so full of trust, so aligned with the source, that divinity could shine through him without distortion. And that perhaps is the greater miracle, not what he did, but how purely he allowed love to move through him. His miracles were not feats of power. They were the natural consequences of union. He was not bending reality. He was restoring it. And that restoration did not end with him. It began through him. For Urantia, this quarantined world, this bruised and isolated planet, he became the cosmic reset. The life of Jesus, as revealed in the Urantia text, was not only a divine bestowal. It was a recalibration of spiritual gravity. A new axis was set, not in the stars, but in the consciousness of a world that had lost its place in the map of the cosmos. He did not just bring light. He planted it. He did not just forgive sin. He reprogrammed the very conditions that sustained it. And he did this not through systems or decrees, but through presence, through compassion, through a perfect life lived in time, which now exists outside of it, resonating eternally in the soul of every being willing to receive it. The mystery of Jesus was never that he was God hidden in a man. The mystery is that he was God revealed through humanity. He did not disguise his divinity beneath his humanity. He expressed it through it. Every breath he took, every choice he made, every moment of stillness and suffering was not a departure from the infinite, but its very unfolding. And in that unfolding, he redrew the inner map of what it means to be human. Before him, divinity was seen as distant, exalted, unreachable. After him, it wore the scent of bread and soil. It had hands that washed feet, eyes that wept, a voice that called the dead by name. He made the sacred visible not by ascending into light, but by descending into love, into the ache and imperfection of the world, and not to condemn it, but to restore it from within. And in doing so, he did something that still ripples through the soul of every creature on this planet. He rewrote the unconscious code. He whispered a new frequency into the collective field, not loudly, but irrevocably. His life became a tuning fork for the human spirit, whether spoken aloud or known in silence, whether in churches or on mountains, in scriptures or in breath. The Christ life planted a vibration into the core of the human race, a remembrance waiting to awaken. Urantia, long isolated, marked by rebellion and spiritual fragmentation, became something else through him, a cradle of restoration, a point of cosmic intervention, not with violence, but with vision. A world once silenced by its disconnection was entrusted with the full revelation of the Creator's Son himself, not only to heal it, but to uplift the entire system of Nebadon through the mystery of love lived completely. He did not come to impose a religion. He came to restore communion. He did not come to demand worship. He came to offer presence. And that presence did not end when he left the visible world. It multiplied. It scattered like seeds across the landscape of time, into art, into silence, into revolution and renewal, into every act of courage that says yes to love in a world still afraid of it. Jesus remains not as relic, but as resonance, not as figurehead, but as frequency, not as unreachable ideal, but as the awakened pattern buried within every soul waiting to rise. To call him the Son of Man is not to limit his nature. It is to reveal our own. He is not only what God looks like in human form. He is what humanity looks like when it remembers it was never separate. Chapter 12, The Last Supper, Mystery, Alchemy, and Surrender. He knew what was coming, and still he chose to sit, not on a throne, but at a table, not surrounded by angels, but by men who would soon deny, betray, abandon. Yet he broke bread with them, poured wine for them, looked into their eyes, and loved them to the end. The Last Supper was not a moment of farewell. It was a moment of fusion. Here, in the simplicity of shared food, the infinite entered the finite with full consent. The bread in his hands was not a metaphor. It was his being, offered without reservation. This is my body, not just what would be wounded, but what had been given every day before this night, in healing and walking in presence and word. He did not begin giving himself in Gethsemane. He had been giving himself all along. The wine was not symbolic. It was alchemical. This is my blood, not the fluid of violence, but the river of life, the very current of divine love, poured out freely, without demand, without transaction. He was not asking to be worshipped. He was inviting union. To take and eat was not a ritual. It was a mystical yes, a merging of realities, heaven entering bread, God entering man, man entering remembrance. This was the table of transformation, not of status, but of essence. Around it sat the ones he had chosen, and still chose, even in their fragmentation. He washed their feet not as a performance of humility, but as the full enactment of love. The Creator bowed before the created. The Word knelt before the dust. The Alpha served the ones who did not yet understand. And he loved them anyway. Even Judas. He did not recoil from the betrayer. He fed him. He honored him. He gave him the bread of friendship, knowing it would become the spark of betrayal. But betrayal, too, was woven into the story, not as punishment, but as passage. It was the crack in the narrative through which the deeper light would pour. Jesus did not resist it. He included it. He absorbed it into the surrender, because the story was never only about faithfulness. It was about love that loves anyway. He did not flinch for what the night held. He knew the footsteps that would echo down the garden path. He knew the cost written in the silence of the sky. And still he sang, not as denial, but as declaration. The hymn that ended the meal was not a melody of escape. It was a vow wrapped in breath. A final note before the unraveling. The world outside that upper room had already begun to turn against him. But within he stood rooted, not in fear, but in offering. This was the true surrender, not to violence, but to the will of the one he called Father. Not to fate, but to the deeper logic of love. He was not being taken. He was giving himself, entirely, consciously, voluntarily. Every gesture had become sacrament. Every silence, a passage. Every step, a choice. He walked out of the supper and into the night, not as a victim, but as a vessel. He carried no sword, no defense, no need to be understood. He had already let go of reputation, of safety, of control. All that remained was essence, presence, trust. He had nothing left to protect, and so he could give everything. The betrayal was not a surprise. The fear in Peter's eyes was not a disappointment. The sleep of the disciples in Gethsemane was not a failure. It was the human condition unfolding around him as it always had. And still, he did not retreat from it. He received it, absorbed it, blessed it. He entered into the night as a priest enters the Holy of Holies, carrying not the sins of a nation, but the sorrow of a world that had forgotten how to see. The Last Supper did not end when the table was cleared. It continued in every tear that he did not hide, in every tremble of flesh that still said yes. In the garden, he asked if the cup might pass, but only if it could pass without breaking the rhythm of love. And when no answer came, he did not resist the silence. He drank it. The Eucharist was not confined to bread and wine. It expanded into agony, into loneliness, into the slow relinquishing of everything except love. His surrender was not resignation. It was the most powerful act in the history of creation, the infinite choosing to be broken so that nothing else would have to be. This was the beginning of the night, but not the end of the light, because even as the shadows grew longer, he was already preparing to become the dawn. Chapter 13. The Crucifixion as Transmutation. They stripped him, but he did not lose himself. They mocked him, but he did not curse them. They pierced him, but he did not resist. The cross was not thrust upon him. It was received, not as defeat, but as declaration. There is no suffering I will not enter. There is no wound I will not carry. There is no hatred I will not meet with love. This was not martyrdom. It was transmutation, a willing descent into the darkest valley, not to prove endurance, but to reveal what endures when all else is taken. On the hill of Calvary, it was not merely a man who hung. It was the mirror of humanity's pain, raised high for all to see. The betrayal, the violence, the fear, the silence of the crowd, the injustice of systems, the failure of friends, all of it gathered there. And he absorbed it, not with fury, with forgiveness. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. These words are not weakness. They were the rupture in the cycle. The ancient wheel of harm and vengeance, wound tight through generations, began to unravel in that moment. Forgiveness became not an escape from pain, but the final word within it. It was not offered once understanding was reached. It was offered in the absence of understanding, as a force more powerful than retribution, more enduring than death. He was not trying to win. He was trying to free, and in doing so, he changed the nature of power itself. The cross was never meant to glorify suffering. It was meant to redeem it, to show that even the most brutal invention of fear could become, in the hands of love, the doorway to rebirth. What men raised to shame him, heaven used to unveil the deepest truth, that love does not end when it is crushed. It expands. It does not yield to violence. It transforms it. The crucifixion was not a transaction. It was an unveiling of what lies beneath the last layer of ego, of what remains when everything else is stripped away, when there is no more control, no more certainty, no more rescue. Only presence, only surrender, only the still center of a heart that loves without condition. In this surrender, Jesus did not collapse into death. He entered it as a conscious act, and in doing so, he infused it with meaning. He turned what was final into passage, what was feared into fulfillment, what was cursed into blessing. Across time and cultures, echoes of this cross appear, not in shape but in essence. The tree of Odin, where the seeker hangs in search of wisdom. The wheel of Dharma, whose turning dissolves illusion. The Ankh of Egypt, looped with eternity. The Taoist surrender into the way. Each a symbol of descent and resurrection, of letting go and receiving anew. The cross is not unique in form, but in fulfillment. It gathers all symbols of sacred death and rebirth into one moment. Lived in flesh, lived in silence, lived with eyes open. Calvary was not just the hill of suffering. It was the altar of transmutation, a furnace in which fear was burned away and love was revealed as the indestructible element of the soul. He did not fight the nails. He embraced the process. And in doing so, he showed us that nothing, no betrayal, no injustice, no darkness is beyond the reach of divine transformation. He did not escape the pain. He sanctified it. He did not demand vengeance. He embodied mercy. And in his final breath, he did not say, "It is over." He said, "It is accomplished," because this was never about ending a life. It was about releasing a pattern into the world, a pattern of love that does not end at the cross, but begins there, Chapter 14. The resurrection of the Urantia body. He rose not to astonish, but to affirm. The tomb did not open so the body could escape. It opened so that humanity could see. Death is not the boundary it believes itself to be. On the third day, in the quiet of early morning, something beyond imagination took place. Not a resuscitation, but a transfiguration. Not a return to old form, but a revelation of new being. According to the Urantia Book, the resurrection of Jesus was not the reanimation of a corpse. It was the emergence of the Urantia form, a higher vibrational body, no longer confined by the physics of Earth, yet still bearing the recognizable imprint of the one who had walked among us. This was not spirit in abstraction, nor flesh in decay. It was synthesis, a bridge between matter and spirit. The first unveiling of what awaits all who awaken. In that moment, the laws of biology bent not to magic, but to a deeper order. The stone was not moved for him. It was moved for us, that we might witness, however dimly, that life continues, not in repetition, but in ascent. He had entered the tomb as the Son of Man and emerged as the luminous pattern of the ascending soul. He did not appear in blazing glory, but in quiet intimacy. He did not descend in thunder, but walked beside travelers who did not recognize him. And when he did reveal himself, it was not with spectacle, but in the breaking of bread, in the calling of names, in the simple gestures that once carried the weight of eternity, now imbued with the afterglow of the risen. The resurrection was not merely proof of survival. It was the demonstration of transformation. Fear dissolved not because death was denied, but because it was transcended. He had entered fully into the human experience, including its most dreaded passage, and returned not as a ghost, but as a guide, as the assurance that what lies beyond is not erasure, but expansion. He appeared not to the powerful, but to the willing. To Mary in the garden, lost in grief, he came not as a radiant being descending from the heavens, but as a presence that called her by name. One word, Mary, and all the barriers between dimensions fell. She saw not a vision, but the living echo of love, transformed yet unmistakable. And still, he told her not to cling, for he had not returned to remain, but to reveal. The appearances that followed were never about convincing the world. They were about preparing hearts. Each encounter bore a unique message, tailored to the soul who received it. To Thomas, he offered touch, not because he needed to prove himself, but because Thomas needed to touch something real to believe in the invisible. To the disciples on the road to Emmaus, he unfolded Scripture, not as doctrine, but as living story, culminating not in thunder, but in the familiar sound of bread breaking in silence. This was his way, not to dominate, but to awaken. The Urantia body was not subject to the limitations of time and space, yet it did not sever connection with the material. He could appear and vanish, pass through walls, and yet eat fish with his friends. The form was not illusion. It was integration, a living testament to the truth that there is no final separation between spirit and matter, only transformation into new harmony. The Urantia Book affirms this mystery, that Jesus entered a phase of existence that awaits all evolutionary creatures of time, where the soul, clothed in a more refined body, continues the journey of ascent toward the divine. He was not a singular exception, but a forerunner, a pattern, a promise, a radiant seed planted in the soil of planetary memory. His resurrection did not merely cancel death, it redefined it, not as cessation, but as transition, not as punishment, but as passage, not as darkness, but as doorway. And in doing so, He unraveled the oldest fear in the heart of humanity. He did not shout from the heavens that death was defeated. He simply walked through it and came back radiant with peace. Chapter 15, The Cosmic Christ and the Inner Return. Where is he now? The question echoes across centuries, not from the curious mind, but from the longing heart. Not merely as inquiry, but as ache. If he lived, if he rose, if he ascended, where is he now? Not in metaphor, not in abstraction, but in being. The Urantia Book offers an answer radiant with wonder. Jesus, Michael of Nebadon, is now enthroned in the spiritual administration of a vast local universe, presiding not as a distant monarch, but as a personal sovereign, intimately involved with the growth of souls across hundreds of thousands of inhabited worlds. He is not less personal because he is cosmic. He is more, for his personality expands with divine scope, and yet remembers every name he ever called, every tear he ever touched, every child he ever blessed. He is now beyond space, yet enters it whenever a soul calls. He is beyond time, yet more present in each moment than any shadow or sound. The Christ who once sat by the well with the Samaritan woman now sits within the heart that dares to turn inward. The voice that calmed the storm now speaks within the silence behind all thought. His ascension was not escape, it was expansion, that the Spirit of truth might be poured out upon all flesh, that no one would ever again have to walk a road to Emmaus wondering if he still walks with us. The return of Christ is not only a matter of prophecy, it is a matter of interior recognition. For before he returns in glory upon the clouds, he returns in humility through the soul. Each time love is chosen over fear, he returns. Each time forgiveness replaces vengeance, he is born again. Each time the hungry are fed, the lonely visited, the stranger welcomed, he lives. He lives not only in heaven, but in the yes whispered in secret, in the candle lit in faith, in the bread broken with reverence. He is not a figure in the past, nor merely a hope for the future. He is the eternal now, and he waits not for the world to be ready, but for the individual to become still. For in that stillness, the veil lifts, and we remember, the Christ who rules the stars is also the Christ who waits in the stillness of your own being. He who governs constellations does not ask for altars of gold, but for hearts made soft by love. He who coordinates the administration of Nebadon does not demand grand ceremony, but intimate surrender. For his presence is not imposed. It is invited. It is not forced. It is found. He comes not in the fire or the whirlwind, but in the whisper, in the breath, in the space between thoughts, when the soul lets go of the noise and listens with something deeper than ears. To commune with him is not to speak in complex words or seek perfect posture. It is to be honest, to be vulnerable, to be present. The Master is not a distant figure to be admired, but a living presence to be encountered again and again in the sacred ordinary, in the washing of dishes, in the silence before sleep, in the ache of loss and the joy of reunion. He is closer than the breath, nearer than the mind, and infinitely more patient than time itself. The Christ lives not in temples made by hands, but in the temple of the soul, and he desires not worship in fear, but companionship in freedom. His voice may take many forms, a thought that was not yours, a dream that lingers with healing, a stranger's kindness that arrives with inexplicable timing. He meets each soul in a language it understands, and yet his invitation is always the same. Come to me, walk with me, let me live through you. To allow Christ to be born within is to say yes to a new rhythm. It is to awaken each morning not to obligation, but to possibility, to know that you're not merely trying to imitate him, but to allow him to move through your hands, to see through your eyes, to breathe through your spirit. Each act of compassion, each choice for love, each moment of forgiveness becomes a cradle in which the Christ is born anew. And this is the deeper meaning of ascension, not escape from the world, but infusion of the world with heaven. The Christ above becomes the Christ within. The one who once walked beside now walks within. His return is not delayed, it is waiting. Waiting for you to turn, waiting for you to see, waiting to be born again. In you, yes, you are never just matter. You are never just mind. You are consciousness clothed in flesh, light braided into biology, soul wrapped in stardust. And your origin is not the dust, but the breath that animated it. From the beginning, something ancient and luminous has whispered your name across galaxies. You are not accidental. You are not late. You are a spark of eternity briefly housed in time. And when Jesus came into this world, he did not come to remind you of your smallness, but of your vastness. He came not to create walls of doctrine, but to tear down the inner walls of separation. Not to demand belief, but to awaken remembrance. Not to claim power, but to model surrender. His mission was never about founding an institution. It was about igniting an interior revolution. The kingdom he spoke of was not a realm of gold and thrones. It was the hidden chamber within the soul where the divine meets the human in stillness and love. He never once said, "Worship me as a distant God." He said, "Follow me, abide in me, become like me." And in this, he offered not a system, but a way. Not a label, but a life. Not a religion, but a reunion. Every parable, every healing, every step he took upon this planet was not a performance. It was a mirror. Each act was a signpost to your own divine inheritance. He fed the hungry not to impress, but to reveal that abundance begins in the heart. He forgave the condemned to show that no soul is beyond return. He wept, not because he was weak, but because God himself wanted to taste the tears of the human experience and make them holy. The call he extended was not a summons to a distant heaven. It was an invitation to awaken here and now, to remember, to listen, to let the kingdom rise from within the ruins. He came not to be placed upon a pedestal, but to walk beside the weary, to kneel with the broken, to lift the forgotten. And still he walks, quietly, patiently, in the hearts of those who dare to believe that love is stronger than fear, that mercy can remake the world, that eternity is not a distant realm, but the pulse beneath all things. The call is not ancient. It is immediate. It does not echo from the past. It rises from within. You are not waiting for him to return. He is waiting for you to awaken. This kingdom he revealed is not built in stone. It is carved into the soul. It needs no priest to mediate, no temple to contain it, no blood to purchase it. It is given freely, lovingly, and constantly, because it is who you are beneath the veils. Every whisper of compassion, every act of forgiveness, every gaze of reverence builds this kingdom in the unseen. It is not only among you, it is within you. It grows when you choose peace over vengeance, when you bless instead of curse, when you love not because of what they did, but because of who you are. And who you are is child of the infinite, not metaphorically, not symbolically. In truth, a spark of the one flame, a thought in the mind of God, a heartbeat in the vastness of forever. He did not come to convince you of his divinity. He came to remind you of yours. So let him rise, not only from the tomb, but from the hidden altar within your being. Let him speak through your silence, serve through your hands, and see the world through your awakened heart. Let him be born again, Not once, not twice, but with every breath that dares to love when it would be easier to fear. You are made for this, and the path is not behind you. It is alive beneath your feet. If you listen closely now, you may hear it, the whisper that started all. You are my beloved. You are my child. You are my dwelling place. And now the story is yours. Walk in wonder, live in truth, and let the light that guided him guide you home. If you enjoyed this content, comment where you're from, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to the channel. Every day, we bring new videos to nourish the soul.